Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read this month, starting with Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. I've been reading this book I think now since maybe August or September. It is a huge book. I'm listening to it and the audiobook is actually 3 different volumes and each volume of the book is 34 hours, and in terms of page count it's 1,500, so it is quite a tome. And although it's very long, it's a story in which not that much happens in terms of action. Clarissa focuses on the titular character, who is a woman who is part of a family, and she is well regarded in this family. She's a pure, virtuous daughter, the best daughter you could wish for, but unfortunately she does something that her family doesn't like. She decides she doesn't want to marry a man that they want her to marry, and her family do some pretty cruel things to her in order to try to persuade her to marry this man, and unfortunately force her into the path of a character called Mr. Lovelace, who is a rake, terrible libertine, and some terrible things ensue. Now, as I said, this story is very long. I'm now on the 3rd volume, and you know, Richardson really does belabor the point with this. Pretty much the whole 1st volume, this is 34 hours of material, is focused on Clarissa as she's being bullied by her family into marrying this man. But what's surprising is, despite the fact that so much of the story is focused on just one thing, it's not boring at all. In fact, it's fascinating how much material Richardson gets out of this and how Moorish the story is. I've never been bored reading this. I've always been engaged and interested in what's going on. And I think a big part of that is just how well drawn these characters are. Clarissa is virtuous, yes, but she's also interesting. She's not your typical, waify, weak, virtuous woman. She's got something about her. She's intelligent, and that comes across in her letters. She also has a fantastic friendship with Anna Howe, and the two of them, especially in the 1st volume, pretty much dominate the whole story, sending letters to each other. Anna Howe is a great counterpoint to Clarissa because she's also a good character, but she's also a bit more sharp than Clarissa. She's not willing to just go with what society dictates in the way that Clarissa sometimes is, to her detriment. And so it's a really nice counterpoint, this friendship between these two. Of course, we also have Mr. Lovelace, and I don't want to spoil some of the big plot moments, but let's just say that his character is absolutely terrible, but in a way that is just so engaging and interesting to read about. You get to really dig into the mind of someone who does some very reprehensible things, but who comes across superficially as someone who you would actually quite enjoy being around. He's witty, he's exciting, and he has a certain way of justifying his actions where sometimes you read it and you think, maybe he has a point there. And then you think about it for 2 seconds and you realise that he really doesn't have a point at all. And that's fascinating, to get a villain like that who's so enigmatic that they can sort of pull you in and then make you discuss it yourself, or even entertaining some of the things that they have said. I think it's definitely going to be one of my top reading achievements of the year. If you want to read a big, long book, but that's interesting, that's got a lot going on, then I can't recommend this one enough. Next up we have a book that's sort of related to Clarissa actually, and that is Aline and Valcour by the Marquis de Sade. Now, you may not have heard of this book by Sade because I think it has only actually been translated into English for the first time very recently, and so outside of France, it's not actually very well read. It's a very interesting book in Sade's catalogue because it's not one that has the Sadean tropes that you would normally find. It's got some violence, it's got some libertines, but the more gruesome pornographic stuff that Sade is known for is barely present at all in this book. Sade actually calls it his philosophical novel, and it certainly is. There's a framing device which is very similar to Clarissa. We have Aline and Valcour, who are 2 lovers who want to be together. But unfortunately for Aline, her father is a libertine, and he wants to marry his daughter off to his libertine friend, and not for very good purposes either. And so at the beginning of the story, Aline is taken away by her mother to a retreat, and they're trying to find a way to unite these 2 lovers, but of course the father is plotting around them. Now, in the middle of this story, we then get a story within a story as some characters come into the narrative, and they tell a story about some adventures that they've been on. And in these adventures we get 2 different settings. One is a setting of a dystopia, where Sade kind of constructs what he takes to be a terrible world, and it's full of libertines and cannibalism and all of the terrible things. And then later on we get a utopia, which is obviously contrasted with the dystopia. Now, I'm currently on the dystopian part, and it's very interesting. I actually would say that this might actually be one of my favourite Sade novels, if not my favourite. In a way, it actually is beneficial to him as a writer that he is scaling back some of the more pornographic stuff here, and that he is just trying to tell, first of all, what seems to me to be an engaging story, but also bringing in the philosophical stuff as well. I also think it's a lot more nuanced than Sard's later work. A lot of Sard's later work, it seems like he's just advocating for pure evil. But in this book, you have a lot more in terms of tension, because you actually have morally good characters and arguments that you're led to empathise with, rather than just following, terrible libertine characters all the time. So it's an interesting one, and if you haven't heard of this work of Sard's, I would definitely recommend picking it up. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing as well where this utopia society goes and how it differs from the dystopian one, because I imagine even Sard's utopian world is going to be kind of weird. So we'll see where that goes when we get there. Now onto a book that I didn't enjoy very much, and probably is the worst book that I have read this year and maybe even ever, and that is Anne Rice's Blood Canticle. I won't talk about this too much because I've already reviewed it on the channel recently, but yeah, this is the last book in Rice's crossover novels with the Mayfair Witches trilogy, and one of my subscribers, I agree with you, you said that essentially this book is her just tying up lots of loose ends, and so you don't really get a cohesive narrative, and I think that is exactly right. You don't get a cohesive narrative in this story, you just have lots of little things that Rice wanted to tie up, and she does it, and what's worse is that she often does it in very unsatisfying ways. You have Quinn Blackwood and his mother, who he killed at the end of the previous novel. She comes back as a ghost. You think it might go somewhere. You think there might be consequences for his actions. There isn't. And Quinn plays barely any role in the story and in that resolution as well. We get the return of Mona Mayfair, who is just awful as a character, completely inconsistently written. And there's a really awkward scene with her where she's dressed in a provocative way, and the start just turns into this kind of evil patriarchal figure telling her to not to dress like that, and it's just awkward, and I have no idea what Rice was going with that scene. And we have an incredibly contrived romance as well between Lestat and Rowan Mayfair. So, really not much going on in this book. There is also the fact that Lestat talks like an absolute plonker as well, but I'll leave that to you if you actually want to read this book, because in a way just seeing Lestat talk like that is quite entertaining, if only for a few moments. That being said, despite the fact that I really didn't like this book, I am definitely anticipating the return of the Vampire Chronicles with Prince Lestat, because Rice left a long gap between these two books, and a lot of people rave about those final three, or at least they rave about the two of the final three. The one in the middle people seem to think is a bit weird, but we come to expect that from Rice, a bit of weirdness every now and then. So I'm looking forward to those three books, and hopefully I'll get onto them soon. Next up we have the continuation of my rereading of the Harry Potter series. I'm now on the Order of the Phoenix. I left a bit of a gap between this one and the Goblet of Fire, whereas with those first four I kind of read them pretty much just one after the other, which is, I don't know why that happened, but kind of interesting because it also mirrored my initial reading experience of the books as well, because there was just a larger gap between the fourth and fifth books. And well, the first thing that I'm noticing about the Order of the Phoenix is just how immediately dark the story is. I used to think, like before I redid this reread, that the first three books, or the first two books, are kind of the childish books. The third book is the kind of transitional one, and the fourth book's where we get into the kind of adulty stuff. But actually, having reread the first four and now this, I think this is the book where we really get into the more young adulty stuff. Because although book 4 introduces, the return of Voldemort and Harry seeing Cedric die, that's just a catalyst. That's signalling the end of his childhood. But before that, the book is still kind of in a similar vein to the earlier books. You do get a bigger expansion of the world again, but still sort of just moving into the darker stuff. And then with this one, it's just like, wow. Harry, for example, I never really realized this previously, but he is horrible in the first few chapters of this book. I'm at the bit now where they've gone to Grimmauld Place and they're having the meeting with the Order of the Phoenix. And yeah, Harry is just so angry with everyone. And he's also a bit of a bully. Like in the first chapter, we see him kind of taking on Dudley's previous role as the bully in their relationship, which is a fascinating reversal. One thing that I complained about with the early books with J.K. Rowling is that the characters are very, especially the villains, are very one note and there's not much to them. But we really see that changing in this book, because you almost feel a little bit sorry for Dudley in that chapter because of the way that Harry is. Now that's not to say that Harry is a horrible person. It's understandable that he is the way he is in the beginning of this book. He saw a friend die and nobody has really spoken to him at all throughout the entire of summer, so he doesn't know what's going on or anything. So, kind of sympathetic with him. But, you're just really seeing Rowling make her characters more nuanced. We even get on Petunia as well, and her getting the Howler and then making sure that Harry is protected in her very cold way, but adding a little bit more complexity to all the characters, and that's really coming through in this book. And so I'm enjoying it a lot, which is surprising because if I remember rightly from my past reading experiences, this one never was a favourite with me. So it'd be interesting to see how that changes or stays the same as I work my way through the book. But I am currently very early on, so that remains to be seen for now. And last but not least, we have Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. So this is part of my Reading Dickens Aloud thing that I'm doing. And so I finished the Pickwick Papers, which I reviewed. I'm now slowly working my way through Oliver Twist. I have read Oliver Twist once before, and I thought it was a solid book. I didn't love it, but it'll be interesting to see if my thoughts change now I'm reading it in a much slower way, and just, you know, sometimes when you read something for a second time, your thoughts change. So I'm interested to see where that goes. I have to say, I'm definitely picking up on more in this book than I usually would if I'm just listening to it. Just the early stages of Oliver's experience in the workhouse, and the way that these men and women in the workhouse treat him for for ridiculous things, treating him like he's evil because he asks for, you know, some extra food. One detail that I especially liked is when Oliver, so before the Undertaker comes to take him away, someone else comes, a chimney sweeper, who looks dodgy, is not a nice person, and has like even had boys die under his watch doing chimney sweeping because was a dangerous thing. And he tries to get Oliver for him, and Oliver goes to this sort of court where they'll sign off the documents so that he'll go with this guy. And the judge or the guy in charge who's signing the document is basically blind, and so can't really see anything. And he doesn't realise that Oliver is terrified to go see this man, and he's kind of standing there trembling. And this man is blind, so he doesn't really notice this. But at the very last moment, he does notice, and then says, no, you can't go with this guy. This looks completely dodgy. And so Oliver is spared at the last moment, and obviously treated like he is evil for, honestly saying that being with that guy would be horrible. And I just really like that scene. Just as a metaphor, the idea that this person whose role it is to sort of protect Oliver, to make sure that he goes somewhere safe, is blind, and actually that is the case. He is semi-blind to the dangers that these children are being put in. And while Oliver might have been spared this fate, you have to wonder how many children have gone through this process and he didn't catch them at the last minute. So I just really like that little detail there. Other than that, I don't have much to say because I'm still very early on, but I'm looking forward to seeing how my thoughts on Oliver will change as I work my way through the book. Alright, that's it for this reading vlog. Let me know down in the comments what books you've been reading this month, and if you've read any of the books that I have read this month or am reading this month, give me your thoughts as well. Always good to talk with you. But until the next video, take care everyone. Ta-ra!